Greetings and salutations, everybody. What is going on? My name is Billy Ray Valentine, and this is the Infinite Fringe on Truth Frequency Radio, live on hackerhameen.podbeam.com and on the infinitefringe.podbeam.com. Greetings to all of you out there listening to the sound of my voice right now, straight out of New York City. Thank you for being here. All right, so this subject I've been wanting to tackle for quite some time. I had somebody on a few months ago, and we kind of brushed on it, but we didn't really dive deep in it. His name was Carl Gallups, and that's exclusive to TFR, so you would have to go over there to hear it. But regardless, I have a label made of mine, if you want to call it that. He is also on Truth Frequency Radio. Very prominent guy, author, and he has his own YouTube channel and his own show on TFR. Sen Garcia is here with me today to discuss Serpent Seed. If you don't know what that is, you will in just a second. Sen, how are you? Welcome to the Infinite Fringe.
Doing well, brother, and I appreciate the invite, and I certainly am interested in hearing this show with you and Carl, and I'm interested in how the subject came up and what you guys spoke about. So, yeah, I definitely want to check that out myself.
You're familiar with Carl?
Yes, I'm familiar with his work. But I had no idea that he was, that he talked about or covered this issue in any manner. It is a very taboo subject and one that not a lot of people want to be associated with for whatever reason. It makes no sense to me because, in my opinion, it's absolutely clear when studying the Bible and also with current events, with what's going on in this day and age with the New World Order and all the elites being of the same bloodline. And I mean, it just ties together so many loose ends and helps to make sense of it all.
Well, that's a good point you bring up, right? It's and I'll tell you from my experience. And I'll send you over that show I did with Carl. And I pushed him on it. I pushed him on it. I wanted him to get into it, and he kind of did, but not really. But we didn't go deep on it. We just hit the surface. But regardless, it's funny you should say, people find this a taboo subject, and I get it. And I'm going to try to get you to see it from my point of view, or the point of view of the normal person walking around that's not as versed in all of this as you are, right? Or as other people like Carl. And we've been indoctrinated, Zen, to believe things in a particular way. So when we hear something as explosive as the serpentine seed theory. Now, just to break it down for people, Adam and Eve, the Garden of Eden, Lucifer, right, the snake that everybody's familiar with, each from the tree of good and evil. This is a totally different interpretation than what you're used to. Zen is going to break it down. I'm not going to do it because I won't be able to do it justice. But when someone presents that information to you and you're used to hearing one version of the story for so long, and this could be, I know you're a correct me if I'm wrong, but you're a flat earther.
Yes.
Same deal. Same deal. We get the same version of the story over and over again. Somebody gives you something else, and you're like, whoa, what are you talking about? So that's why people find it so taboo, They're not willing to take that step, and it's part of the indoctrination of the mind, and it's hard to break through. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, absolutely. That I find with regard to truth that for a lot of individuals, it's most difficult overcoming their own brainwashing, and the prison of their mind keeps them locked in and really antagonistic to anything that does not fit into what they think they already know of truth, whether it's has any basis in reality or not. And so for most people, they will stand by majority opinion and vehemently oppose everything else that contradicts what they see, their perspective on reality. Yeah. And so for a lot of people, they'll never make that to be able to bridge that gap.
Yeah, they'll never make the jump.
They'll never make the jump. And And it's unfortunate, and that's why, deception rules in this world, and why it says in Revelation that that old serpent, that ancient dragon, who deceiveth the entirety of the world, that most, even mainstream Christianity, is caught up in so many ways in idolatry and paganism, and without understanding, and they're unwitting participants in what really is labeled in the law as abomination. And so, and that includes not just the cosmology and how we've been lied to about that, but also the calendar system with regard to Sabbath, so many things, the Levitical feast days, the holy days, how most people are involved in the worship of Halloween and Christmas and Easter and these different pagan holidays. And so a lot of mainstream Christianity is steeped in idolatry without understanding it in any manner. And so certainly led astray into deception.
Absolutely, and probably by design. Easter is
Absolutely, yeah.
right around the corners, and
Right.
that's something we plan on touching. Maybe not here, but at some point before
Yeah, sure.
Easter. I want to get into it, man. But listen, I want you to break this down for us and give people an overview. While we are on the same station, we have completely different audiences. I am also on other platforms, and they may not be, what is it? Versed is is the wrong word to use, at all exposed to any of this that you're about to present right now. And man, it is certainly something. Okay, so I want everybody, listen. If you are a Christian and you have a Bible, break out your Bible, right? And
Absolutely.
if you are not a Christian and you do not have a Bible, or if you're a Christian without a Bible, break out your pad and pen. You're gonna wanna take notes and go back and verify what's gonna be said, because you can,
Right.
you can all take the position that it's interpretation. We can all do that. I get a lot of mail from people telling me, "Oh, why would you say this or why would you do that?" There's it's interpretation, and Zen is here to present his. I find it fascinating, and very compelling. So I am glad that he accepted my invitation to come on and talk about this. Zen, take it away, man. What is the serpentine seed theory?
Yeah, sure. Well, just to give you a general overview of the topic, it has to do with Eve's beguilement in the garden, and how most mainstream Christians believe that her eating fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, that fruit was an apple. And so when you really look at and examine the words in the Hebrew, you find out that the beguilement, and it becomes clear also in other passages, other scriptures, that what is being alluded to in with what happened in the garden is that Eve's beguilement by the serpent was actually sexually, has sexual connotations associated to it, and that her eating fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil actually represents the serpent's temptation and seduction of her. And that when you even look up that word in the Hebrew, nashah, it means wholly seduced. And also in 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 2 and 3, Paul makes mention there of how Eve beguilement by the serpent resulted in her losing her chastity and not being a virgin. And we know that the only way a woman can lose her virginity is by being sexually, morally corrupted. And so that's truly what happened in the garden when you understand the underlying meaning and the veiled text as far as what is really being conveyed with this particular story. And so we'll examine Genesis chapter 2, 3, 4, and 5 to get the specifics of what I'll be speaking about this evening. And so, what is most important to understand with regard to the Genesis 3 temptation is that in chapter 2, verse 25, it says that, and they were both naked, the man and his wife, and were not ashamed. And so you see here that it, their being naked was not the problem at all. That something occurred in Genesis 3 with the temptation to eat this fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and that after having done so, that introduced into them embarrassment. And so we'll look at the story as it is conveyed. And so going into Genesis chapter 3, we see that the serpent, it says, was more subtle than any beast of the field. Looking up that word subtle, it means leaning towards evil. And when you read the Targum version, which I guess I'll go ahead and bring that up as well, that the Targum version, there's an Aramaic translation of the Hebrew Torah.
Now, what is the Targum?
The Targum simply means translation.
All right, cool.
And the King James Version of the Bible is an English translation because it's a transliteration into English of the original Hebrew scriptures. The Greek Septuagint is a translation. But this particular translation that I allude to, and that most people are not familiar with, it's the Aramaic and the Palestinian Targum. And it dates back to the time when the Israelites were led astray into the diaspora and taken away in exile for the 70 years under Nebuchadnezzar. And so this happened in 587 BC. And so for those 70 years leading up to 517 BC, they were held in exile in Babylon. And during that time, they assimilated Aramaic as their predominant lexicon. It was the language in use during that time in that part of the world. And so utilizing Aramaic, that became really the lay persons, as far as the Israelites, that's the language which was in use when they were allowed to return back to the Holy Land after Darius and Cyrus freed them from the bondage of Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon, and the Persian rulers came into power during that time, exactly as Daniel had interpreted in his vision of the statue. And so allowing them to return to their Holy Land and to rebuild the temple, it took 43 years for them to rebuild the temple. And so sometime in 470 BC, the temple was rebuilt and then worship was reinstituted. Well, when they began to have devotion and to gather to share the law, the priests who were, still adept with Hebrew, they kept having to stop and to read the Hebrew manuscript, the Hebrew Torah, and retranslate it into Aramaic so that the Israelites, the lay people, could understand their own scriptures. And so they did not have an Aramaic translation, a written form of the text. And the Israelites that wanted to study the law, they, basically they wanted a translation. And so the Aramaic and the Palestinian Targum then came into being. And it's the first translation of the Hebrew Torah into a different language. And when we now have, in 1869 or 1862, Etheridge, he made a translation available into English for, the Western community. And so at that time, the Targum became available to us when it had not been available. J.W. Etheridge in 1862, he published the Targums into English. And so for the first time, we had the most ancient translation of the Hebrew Torah available to us for study. And when you read these particular texts, what is listed and cited within them is absolutely amazing. In fact, every Saturday, we do a weekly Targum study where we're going through the Pentateuch, which the oldest translation only have the 5 books of Moses, because that's all that existed during that time. And so we've been going through chapter by chapter and verse by verse these particular texts, and the people that have joined us that have never studied or read the Targum are absolutely amazed at the depth and the detail and what has been really excluded and lost in translation from our modern English, including the King James and even the Greek Septuagint. That you'll see there's a lot of information in the Targum which are not included in any of the other renditions. And so it's the one that I recommend that people study from and look to get a better idea as to what the Bible is bringing forth in story.
So
And
it'll provide like a completely different viewpoint, just based on on translation. So whatever we're reading right now would you say it's dumbed down or just changed completely?
it is dumbed down, and oftentimes it is changed completely. And so that's why, again, I do recommend that people study the Targum. And it's not just because it does confirm Serpent Seed as truth in Revelation, but there are so many other things within the text that are, again, excluded. Like, for instance, it talks about how Og had ridden on top of the ark and was saved in that manner and fed by Noah, so that he survived the flood
And
of Noah's day.
Og was a giant.
Yeah, Og of Bashan.
Okay.
And it speaks about him as being the last remnant giant from the primordial, the antediluvian days. And so, these kind of stories are excluded. And I'll share some passages that are of great interest for people. Like, for instance, we'll look at Genesis 6, and then I'll bring that one up with regard to Og after we do this Serpent Seed, just to give people an idea as to some of the stuff that is included in the Targum, which is excluded from all the other translations. But
Perfect.
so we're going to look at Genesis chapter 3, and specifically in talking about the eating of the fruit. And we can read it from the King James, which most people are familiar with, but I do also recommend that people look at it from both the Greek Septuagint, which, you want to do a parallel study. And I wrote a book called The Great Contest 2, Enmity Between the Seedlines, where I lay out this entire premise as far as what happened in the garden and what is being revealed from all different viewpoints, so that people that are interested in this can really get it in the greatest detail that they can. And so I recommend that people check out that book if they're interested in this. So reading from the Targum in Genesis chapter 3, it says, "And the serpent was wiser unto evil than all the beasts of the field which the Lord God had made. And he said to the woman, Is it truth that the Lord God hath said, You shall not eat of every tree of the garden? And the woman said to the serpent, From the rest of the fruits of the trees of the garden we have power to eat, but of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, the Lord hath said, You shall not eat of it, nor approach it, lest you die. And you'll see if you're following along in the King James just how much more information is found in the Targum. In that hour, the serpent spake accusations against his creator and said to the woman, dying you will not die, for every artificer hateth the son of his art. For it is manifest before the Lord that in the day that ye eat of it, you will be as the great angels, who are wise to know between good and evil. And this is an interesting part because it actually names the serpent. And the woman beheld Samael, the angel of death, and was afraid. Yet she knew that the tree was good to eat, and that it was medicine for the enlightenment of the eyes, and desirable tree by means of which to understand. And so we see that it seems that this particular tree has some kind of hallucinogenic properties in order to open the mind, or at least to the enlightenment of the eyes. And so that it makes them, as it says here, you will be as the great angels who are wise to know between good and evil.
Hey Zen, let me get in here real quick with that, right? So
Yeah, sure.
I always think about that, and I think about our current state of being, and I could be very wrong here, but I want your thoughts on it.
Yeah.
So in the garden, before our eyes were opened or whatever, however you want to frame it, or anyone else does, we were essentially in a state of innocence. Is that bad to say? I don't know, but
No, it's not bad.
okay.
Sure, yes.
So now, I mean, I feel like this was in a way representing free will, like what we have now. Like it was almost dangerous to have this free will because we weren't ready to have it. And now there's good. Whenever there's good, there's evil, right? So free will, you have to be able to pick from both. Otherwise, it's not free will. Does this make any sense to you?
Yes, absolutely.
All right, go ahead. That's
Yes.
just what I was thinking.
Yes, very true. Because in innocence, we were not exposed to the full spectrum of pain and pleasure. And yes, being granted free will, and as far as the lesson of duality, that we would then experience from good and evil, light and darkness. And it is that experience which, can be, as we said now, you have the full exposure of the full spectrum of experience that is available through this duality. And it's both a blessing and a curse. But continuing. And she took of its fruit and did eat, and she gave to her husband with her, and he did eat. And the eyes of both were enlightened, and they knew that they were naked, divested of the purple robe in which they had been created. And they saw the sight of their shame, and sewed to themselves the leaves of figs, and made to them cinctures, which cinctures are just like clothing to cover vestments.
Yeah, the nether
And so,
regions or something.
yeah, to cover up their private areas.
Yeah.
And so, looking at the story, they're eating this fruit, their mind and their eyes were open, and then they basically, after having eaten it, they are shamed, and they make a covering to cover up their genitals. And so, in my opinion, in the way that I explain this story, and there are other verses which confirm this as well, that because God warned them to not eat or touch the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, that when they did, that they would be placed under the authority of death. And so, in my opinion, that when they ate this fruit, and I do believe it was a literal tree, and that it was some kind of hallucinogenic plant, vine, something, and that it opened their minds much like, a drug would, and that they then were brought into human mortality, that God said that they would be placed under the authority of death. So in my opinion, that when they ate this fruit, touched this tree, they then became flesh and blood human beings. And so they lost what is cited in the first book of Adam and Eve as their bright natures, their immortal, angelic state of being, their pre existent state of being before falling into flesh and mortal form. And it's also my opinion that that is the moment when their genitals, also that they had actual genitalia. And it was then that the serpent, beguiling Eve, sexually seduced her. And then Adam's eating of the fruit with her, repeating the act, that he also laid with Eve. And going further into the story, you'll see that this is actually what occurred. And so, continuing.
So just for anybody out there that doesn't know, lay means have sex with. That's
Yes.
what you're trying to get at, right?
And
Just to
also,
clarify.
right, when you look at the Hebrew, and we will do that as well. After I go through the story, we'll look at some of the Hebrew terms. The term to eat means to lie with the woman, and also touch, and the fruit and seed also mean descendants, progeny, children. And so, again, those particular terms that are used to convey this story of them eating fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil have everything to do with pregnancy, bringing forth children, as we'll see in the punishments that are about to come up. But continuing, it says, and they heard the voice of the word of the Lord God. See, right here, it's telling you that this is Christ, the word of the Lord God. And this is something that is not brought up in the King James either. And so it was Yeshua that was walking in the garden in the repose of the day, and Adam and his wife hid themselves from before the Lord God among the trees of the garden. And the Lord God called to Adam and said to him, is not all the world which I have made manifest before me? The darkness as the light, and how hast thou thought in thine heart to hide from before me? The place where thou art concealed, do I not see? Where are the commandments that I commanded thee? And so, God is telling them, you can't hide from me. I'm the creator. I made everything. I know all things, whether you do them in darkness or not, which is, again, something that is excluded from the King James, because, people think that God doesn't know where they are. But here in the Targum version, it's clear that he knows and he calls them out. And then, so continuing, it says, and he said, the voice of thy word heard I in the garden, and I was afraid, because I am naked, and the commandments which thou didst teach me I have transgressed. Therefore I hid myself from shame. And he said, who showed thee that thou art naked, unless thou hast eaten of the fruit of the tree of which I commanded thou that should not eat? And Adam said, the woman whom thou gavest to me with me, she gave me of the fruit of the tree, and I did eat. And the Lord God said to the woman, what hast thou done? And the woman said, the serpent beguiled me. And again, that word beguiled there means wholly sexually seduced. With his subtlety, with his evil. As we saw in the first part, it says that his subtlety was his tendency towards evil. And deceived me with his wickedness, and I ate. And the Lord God brought three. This is interesting too, because this again is excluded, and it will show and verify that It's only by understanding that her eating fruit was sexually metaphorical that the curses then make sense. And it says, the Lord God brought the three unto judgment, and he said to the serpent, because thou hast done this, cursed art thou of all the cattle and all the beasts of the field. Upon thy belly thou shalt go, and thy feet shall be cut off, and thy skin thou shalt cast away once in 7 years. And the poison of death shall be in thy mouth, and dust shalt thou eat all the days of thy life. And this is important. And I will put enmity between thee and the woman, and between the seed of thy son and the seed of her sons. And it shall be when the sons of the woman keep the commandments of the law, that they will be prepared to smite thee upon thy head. But when they forsake the commandments of the law, thou wilt be ready to wound them in their heel. Nevertheless, for them there shall be a medicine, but for thee there will be no medicine, and they shall make a remedy for the heel in the days of the King Messiah. And so we see that this particular prophecy is connected to the return of the coming of Christ, which he will be the seed of the woman that crushes the head of the serpent. And I'll explain that in a minute. But this is the first prophecy about the coming of Christ. And so looking at that verse again, and I will put enmity between thee and the woman, and between the seed of thy son and the seed of her sons. This is prophetic as well. And the reason I say so is because that portion, the seed of thy son and the seed of her sons, is excluded from the King James. But it is alluding to that the serpent, his seed would be Cain, the seed of thy son. And Cain is said in 1 John chapter 3, verse 12, to be of that wicked one. That word of there meaning son of, child of, or progeny, descendant of the wicked one. And so continuing, and the seed of her sons. The reason it is mentioning her sons here in this particular passage is because Cain murdered Abel, his half-brother, and Abel would be replaced by Sheth. Even his name in the Hebrew, Sheth, means substitution, compensation, recompense. And so that's exactly what Sheth was. He was a replacement for Abel, who was murdered by his half-brother Cain. And we see that the prophecy here that the seed of the woman would crush the head of the seed of the serpent at the same time that it was nipping at his heel, this prophecy was fulfilled in the day that Christ was crucified on the cross. 1600 years earlier, David, when he was selected as a shepherd boy to go against and to fight Goliath, the giant, the Philistine champion Goliath, that he was able to stun him with a sling stone, and then utilizing his own sword, he cut Goliath's head off, and then took his head as a trophy to show to the people of Jerusalem that he had indeed slain the Philistine champion, and that they need not worry or be fearful anymore of Goliath. And so afterwards, David buried Goliath's head at a place called Golgotha, which Golgotha translates to Goliath of Gath, which is where Goliath was from. And so this particular place, also known as Calvary, or the Hill of the Skull, it became known for being the burial place of Goliath's skull. And this is the same place that 1600 years later that Christ would be crucified, on the Hill of the Skull.
Wow.
And so indeed, when Christ was crucified in this area that, because Goliath's skull was embedded in the earth, this was the prophecy fulfilled, in that Christ would be crushing the head of the serpent seed, which was Goliath, and Goliath's skull would be nipping at his heel. And so this is the prophecy that was fulfilled, because we see that this war between the bloodlines would begin with Cain and Abel, but it would be ended at the cross. That Christ would basically defeat death and defeat the children of evil, the Pharisees who had conspired his murder, that he said of them that they were the murderers of the prophets from Abel to Zacharias, and that he would return again at the end of days. And at that time, he would gather the wheat for preservation and the tares for burning, which is another prophecy of these two different bloodlines that we'll go into in just a short bit. But I want to continue with the story in Genesis so that people will understand this in its entirety. All right, so continuing. Unto the woman he said, multiplying, I will multiply thy affliction by the blood of thy virginity and by the conception. In sorrow shalt thou bear children, and to thy husband shall be thy desire, and he will have rule over thee unto righteousness or unto sin. And so the result of Eve's eating fruit from this tree of the knowledge of good and evil is that she will bring forth children in sorrow, and that she would lose her virginity, and that she would bring forth children in conception. And so God is telling her basically that because you ate from this fruit, then you were seduced by the serpent, you are now pregnant, and you're going to bring forth two different children. One will be the seed of the serpent, and the other will be the seed of the woman, and that there's going to be enmity between these two bloodlines when they are born. To Adam, he said, because thou hast hearkened to the word of thy wife, and hast eaten of the fruit of the tree of which I commanded thee, saying, thou shalt not eat of it, accursed is the ground in that it did not show thee thy guilt. In labor shalt thou eat of it all the days of thy life. And thorns and thistles will it put forth, and increase on account of thee. And thou shalt eat the herb which is on the face of the field. So basically, God is telling Adam that whereas in the garden when he lived in paradise, he didn't have to work the ground. The trees of the garden gave of their fruit freely, and they brought forth their fruit without any necessary toil or any struggle. But God is telling Adam now, you're going to have to work the ground in order to bring forth sustenance, in order to feed what are going to be your future progeny, the children that are going to be born from you and through you, because remember, Adam ate also. Eve gave him the fruit, and he did eat, meaning that he repeated the act with her, and the result of that was that Abel would be born, and Abel would be his firstborn son. And so we see in the next verse, it says, and Adam called the name of his wife Hava. Hava means life giver, because she is the mother of all the children of men. And the Lord God made to Adam and to his wife vestures of honor from the skin of the serpent, which he had cast from him upon the skin of their flesh, instead of that adornment which had been cast away, and he clothed them. So God places them into flesh, and he gives them what are called the garments of power, which is a whole nother story. But basically, it was the first clothes that God had made for both Adam and Eve. And then God says, and the Lord God said to the angels who ministered before him, behold, Adam is sole on the earth, as I am sole in the heavens above. And it will be that they will arise from him who will know to discern between good and evil. Had he kept the commandments which I appointed to him, he would have lived and subsisted as the tree of life forever. But now, because he hath not kept that which I prescribed, it is decreed against him that we keep him from the Garden of Eden, before he reach forth his hand and take of the tree of life. For behold, if he eat thereof, living he will live and subsist forever. And the Lord God removed him from the Garden of Eden, and he went and dwelt on Mount Moriah to cultivate the ground from which he had been created. And he drave out the man from thence where he had made to dwell the glory of his Shekinah, at the first between the two cherubim. And before he had created the world, he created the law, he prepared the Garden of Eden for the righteous, that they might eat and delight themselves with the fruit of the tree, because they would have practiced in their lives the doctrine of the law in this world, and have maintained the commandments. But he prepared Gehenna for the wicked, which is like the sharp consuming sword of the two edges. In the midst of it he hath prepared flakes of fire and burning coals for the judgment of the wicked, who rebelled in their life against the doctrine of the law. And so God is talking about how heaven, both paradise and hell, have been created as a judgment for what is now the coming duality, where man would be tempted to learn from the knowledge of good and evil, and that a fallen world had to be created in order to accommodate Adam and Eve's fall from grace. And so when they were kicked out of paradise, which paradise is above the vaulted dome, it's the place of the righteous, and it's where people go after their death as long as they are worthy. And you had a question?
I didn't want to interrupt you.
Oh, no, you're fine. I heard you take a breath, so.
Yeah, above the vaulted dome, that's, I'm assuming that's the firmament.
Yes, uh-huh.
Okay. And is this entire existence, is this entire existence right now a punishment? I mean, from this interpretation, that's the way it sounds. I could be very wrong, but we've been brought down here to work the land, and we're paying for the sins of our fathers and our mothers, right? And I mean, that's the way it looks right now. And we know good and evil. So you said in the beginning it was a gift and a curse. So I get
Yes.
that. And there's a duality which exists in everything. It's a balance here in this. So there's the yin and the yang, the man and the male and the female. There's the sun and the moon. There's water and fire, so on and so forth. Life and death, good and evil. It seems to me like this is we're I could be wrong here, but we're paying for this. We're paying for what was done in the garden.
Yes, but there's also something that I teach of, and that's called election.
All right.
And I talk about how we pre-existed before coming into flesh form, and that we were known, as it says in the scriptures, that some were predestinated, and that we were known by the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, even before the foundations of the world. That even before the earth and paradise and all the different aspects of the creation were manifest, that we were already incarnated as bright-natured angelic beings. And so we pre-existed. That, even in Jeremiah chapter 1, verses 4 and 5, the word of the Lord says to Jeremiah, I knew you before you ever entered into the womb of your mother. I had foreordained you to be a prophet unto the nations. And that we see when you study and you understand about election, election is what determines whether one is to be favored like Jacob or one is to be hated like Esau. Because in the scriptures, it says that both Jacob was favored and Esau hated, and they were children that had not yet even been born. And so, how does it make sense that a just, loving, and compassionate God could hate a child that had not yet even been born unless there was something that was done by both to determine the favoritism or the hatred that each would receive? And in my opinion, that is alluding to our preexistence and how we had spiritual embodiment prior to coming into flesh form. And that the war in heaven, which occurred previous even to the creation of Adam and Eve, that war in heaven involved all of the souls of humanity. And that depending on what side we took during that confrontation, and whether we chose to side with God or to rebel against God, that election is what is original sin. And so rather than paying for, even though, yes, Adam and Eve did sin, and that was the reason why all of humanity finds ourselves in flesh form, still, in my opinion, we have responsibility for that determination and for our being now found in flesh embodiment. And again, it goes back to election, which at some point we can do a show about that as well, if you'd like,
Awesome.
because it's a whole nother very deep and in-depth topic to cover. But
So real quick before we go back to the Serpentine Seed, right?
yeah,
Election. Actually, this question rolls right into it, but I want to get you back on track to where you were and not take you off, right? So, but election or bloodline, right? So, what is the thing here, right? So, if we come down and there's an election of what we're going to be or what we are before we incarnate, right?
yes,
Do we incarnate into the bloodline of the serpent, or is it something else?
uh, either or, depending on your election, and whether you are favored like Jacob, who was born of the seed of promise of Israel, or if you are born, say you were an antagonist and you were in rebellion against the Most High, you may be like Esau, hated and born of the serpent bloodline, which does not mean, because even though election determines the circumstances and the situation of our birth, that is not what determines our eternity, our salvation. Salvation is determined through Christ and whether we accept him as Savior Messiah. And when he died on the cross, he extended salvation and grace to all people, both people, the bloodline of Cain, and also the Gentile and pagan nations, which prior to that time, the Israelites were told never to intermarry with the pagan peoples and to keep themselves separate. And so they were excluded from salvation, just like the giants that were born from the interdiction of the fallen watchers with the daughters of Cain. They have no part in salvation. But now the Illuminati bloodlines and the seed of Cain has been grafted in. We are all one church and one people now, even though there are two separate bloodlines here on the earth, the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent. But when Christ died on the cross, he did extend grace to everybody everywhere, and that determination is whether one knows him as Savior Messiah or not. And so election does not exclude you from salvation, but it does determine the circumstances of the life and the kind of awareness and awakening one has to go through in order to understand eternity and the whole, what I call the great contest between the bloodlines and how it ties together with the war in heaven.
Very good. Very good. Go ahead. Continue down your road.
Okay. And so we see that once they are placed into flesh, they are cast out of paradise. And the reason God won't allow them to take from the tree of life is because now they are in a fallen form. And if they eat from the tree of life in their fallen form, they will be forever in this fallen state of being. And so God cast them out of paradise, placed them here to the earth where the fallen angels have already been cast out long before. Because when you read about my first book on the Great Contest is called The War in Heaven. And I describe how in the first 3 verses of Genesis that the separation of light and darkness, that is the war where the war in heaven takes place, and that's also where our election is determined. And that war in heaven also led to the destruction of the earth in its previous form. And where it says, and the earth became without form and void, in the Hebrew, it means that the earth became an indistinguishable deserted wasteland and an indistinguishable ruin. And that it was created initially perfect, but that the division, the separation of light and darkness, and Legion rebelling against the Most High God, that's what led to this war and their being cast down and cast out of the heavens. And so the fallen angels were cast out of the heavens long before humanity was even created. And they were cast here to the earth. And so we see that in the Chronicles, the timeline of the age of the earth, that it's not just a 6,000 year timeline. Yes, the Second World Age goes back 6,000 years, but they were cast out before that time, and that the earth was already destroyed. And the Second World Age is a 7,000 year timeline, but who knows how long, how many years existed prior to the destruction of the earth. And we see this mentioned in the scriptures as well. It speaks about in many places, specifically in Jeremiah chapter 4, verses 23 through 30. It speaks about a time when there was not yet man, and how the birds of the wilderness fled, and that these cities of the wilderness had been destroyed. And in Ezekiel chapter 26, it speaks about destruction of the Atlanteans and how, the fallen angels and these pre-Adamic fallen angelic civilizations existed here in the prior times, in what the Egyptians reference as Zep Tepe. And so all of these things are part of the biblical narrative. It's just that because they're not taught in the seminaries or during Sunday school or during the sermons of these mainstream pastors, most people have no idea as to the prehistory of humanity and of how the megalithic structures that were created by these fallen angels and the giants of old, how they were the ones that created all of the megalithic sites. And many of them, that we see have been in existence for so long that they are at the bottoms of the oceans. For instance, like Yanaguni and Dwarka and the megalithic temple complex outside of Cuba, the pyramidal structures that are found there. These things had to have been built previous to what was the global ice meltdown and the rising of the seas and the oceans of the world and the changing of the water levels. That all of that could not have been done by man because we were not yet in existence. And so something had to have been responsible for the creation of those things. And when you understand the timeline of what is revealed within the scriptures, then you see that it was the fallen angels. And what is cited in the Sumerian as the Anunnaki, and the pre-Adamic humans that they tried to create a slave race out of. That this is why we see in the ancient times the worship and the reverence of the feathered serpent, which the feathered serpent is the same thing as Satan in the garden that beguiled Eve. And so these are the connections, and why we see even now that the elites of the world, the secret societies, and the ancient peoples of the world, that they give reverence to sexual icons, the phallus, and the ova and the egg, and the tree, and also to the feathered serpent, the dragon, that these particular icons are revered in these secret societies worldwide and have been since very ancient times. And the reason being is because, again, in my opinion, it shows and is connected to even where the children of the devil originate, and how it was that the serpent beguiling the ancestor of humanity, Eve, created his own progeny and spawned his own race of beings here upon the earth. And that this is celebrated by the elites as their origin story. And they know where they came from. They even speak about it and share it in their hidden traditions. And it's only we, as the sons of Adam, that have forgotten this story, and that this secret has been lost to us for a very long time. But it is absolutely encoded within the scriptures, and it was knowledge that was commonplace during the early establishment of the church. And you'll see that in the next aspect we'll go into, that Christ alludes to this several places in several different scriptures and stories and parables.
Let's get it. Hit me with some of them.
And before we get into the parables, I'll read one chapter here on, just to finish up what we're talking about with the King James story of these two bloodlines. In Genesis chapter 5, it says in the Targum version, "And Adam lived 130 years and begat Sheth, who had the likeness of his image and of his similitude. For before had Hava born Cain, who was not like to him, and Abel was killed by his hand. And Cain was cast out, neither is his seed genealized in the book of the genealogy of Adam, but afterwards there was one born like him, and he called his name Sheth." So we see that, Cain is not included in Adam's genealogy. He's separated from Adam's genealogy, and his 10 generations of his descendants are found in Genesis chapter 4. And Adam's 10 generations are listed in Genesis chapter 5. Oh, I think it's important too that before we do that, let's just mention a few of the Hebrew words. In Hebrew, the word for touch is naga, and it means to lie with a woman.
Naga, like Naga, Naga?
Yeah,
Just
yeah,
reminds
naga.
me of the snake people, the people of the snake.
Right, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And the word for eat is the word akal, and it means to lay with or enjoy something as good fortune, sexual pleasures, or the fruit of good or evil actions. The word fruit is perier, and it means offspring, children, progeny of the womb. Beguiled is the word nasha, and it means morally to seduce, beguile, deceive greatly and utterly. And the word for seed is zera. It means to plant, sowing time, posterity, carnally, children, offspring, descendants, posterity, semen, virility, and fruitfulness. The word conception is haron. It means pregnancy, physical conception. To bring forth is the word yalad. It means to bear young, uh, to show lineage, to beget, to birth, young children to bring up. Um, and so you see how all of these words have, sexual connotations associated to them.
Yeah.
Even the word Cain, his name means acquired, possession, like like a stepson, which is exactly what he was, because he was not the child of Adam's. And so, all right, we'll go into now the looking at the parables in Matthew 13. And this is where Christ speaks about in great detail what had happened in the garden. And he alludes to it so that people can understand. I had told you that there's a passage in 1 John chapter 3, verse 12, where it says, not as Cain, who was of that wicked one and slew his brother. The word of there is the Greek word 1537 in the Strong's Concordance. And it implies a person, it means a son of, a child of, or the offspring of the wicked one. So it's basically telling you that Cain was of the wicked one, which is exactly what is alluded to when we look at the stories here in Matthew chapter 13. And so we'll look at three parables: the parable of the kingdom, the parable of the sower, the parable of the tares of the field. In verse 24, Matthew 13, it says, another parable put he forth unto them, saying, the kingdom of heaven is like unto a man which sowed good seed in his field. But while men slept, his enemy came and sowed tares among the wheat and went his way. But when the blade was sprung up, meaning when the children were born, and brought forth fruit, then appeared the tares also. So the servants of the householder, the angels, came and said unto him, Sir, didst not thou sow good seed in thy field? From whence then hath it tares? He said unto them, an enemy hath done this. The servant said unto him, wilt thou then that we go and gather them up? But he said, nay, lest while you gather up the tares, you root up also the wheat with them. Let both grow together until the harvest, and in the time of the harvest I will say to the reapers, gather ye together first the tares, and bind them in bundles to burn them, but gather the wheat into my barn. And so Christ is telling us in this story that while men slept, that meaning when Adam was not protecting Eve, the serpent seduced her and sowed the tares amongst the wheat. The tares are the children of the devil. And when the children were born, lo and behold, Cain, who was of that wicked one, came forth first, and he was a child of the devil, which is why he was a murderer, a liar, and a deceiver, completely unlike Adam or Eve, who were innocent, and even though they had fallen, still they had no inclination for evil. Certainly not murder, but yet this came about as natural instinct for Cain. And we know that, again, it says that the devil is considered to be a murderer as well. And so, continuing, in the parable of the tares of the field, this is after he sends the multitudes away, meaning that, he speaks to the multitudes in parable, because when they are able to discern and to understand, then the story would make sense. But until then, it would become a riddle, and it would be like a puzzle that they would have to unlock. But here, Christ sends the multitudes away, and then his disciples come unto him, saying, Declare unto us the parable of the tares of the field. We know it not. He answered and said unto them, He that soweth the good seed is the Son of Man. The field is the world. The good seed are the children of the kingdom, but the tares are the children of the wicked one. So here he's interpreting the parable that we had just read of the kingdom, that the field is the world, and all of a sudden you have both good seed, which is from the Son of Man, and then the tares, the tares are the children of the wicked one. And he says they're the wicked one because, again, that is an allusion to 1 John chapter 3, verse 12, where it says, Cain, who was of the wicked one. And then in the very next verse, he says, the enemy that sowed them, which that's an allusion back to the parable that we just read, an enemy hath done this, is what he said. The enemy that sowed them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the world, and the reapers are the angels. So, it's very clear here that he says the enemy is the devil. The devil is the enemy which sowed the tares, and the tares are the children of the wicked one. I mean, it's not veiled in any manner. It's very clear. It's just that, again, cognitive dissonance, people are unable to overcome their indoctrination to see what is absolutely clear within the scriptures. And so, continuing, the enemy that sowed them is the devil, the harvest is the end of the world, and the reapers are the angels. As therefore the tares are gathered and burned in the fire, so shall it be in the end of the world. The Son of Man shall send forth his angels, they shall gather out of his kingdom all things that offend, and them which do iniquity, and shall cast them into a furnace of fire. There shall be wailing and gnashing of teeth. Then shall the righteous shine forth as the sun in the kingdom of their Father. Who hath ears to hear, let him hear. And just to reiterate, Christ goes into it two more times. He says in verse 47, again, the kingdom of heaven is like unto a net that was cast into the sea, and gathered of every kind, which when it was full they drew to shore, and sat down, and gathered the good into vessels, but cast the bad away. So shall it be at the end of the world. The angels shall come forth, and sever the wicked from amongst the just, and shall cast them into the furnace of fire. There shall be wailing and gnashing of teeth. Jesus saith unto them, Have you understood all these things? They said unto him, Yea, Lord. And, he goes into it again in Matthew chapter 25, where he speaks about the goat and the sheep. The goat are the tares, and the sheep are the children of the kingdom. And so he reiterates this over and over just to make sure that they understand this. And he says of this knowledge that many have wanted to know these things, but they do not understand. They, not having the eyes to see, the ears to hear, or mind to understand, that all these things would escape most people, so that they simply would not understand what the scriptures were talking about. But he says, but blessed are your eyes, for they see, and your ears, for they hear. For verily I say unto you, that many prophets and righteous men have desired to see those things which ye see, and have not seen them, and to hear those things which ye hear, and have not heard them, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken of by the prophet. I will open my mouth in parables, I will utter things which have been kept secret from the foundation of the world. And so, Christ is telling us again that this knowledge has been lost and it's been hidden, and that the Pharisees, who are the children of the devil, that they have hidden themselves amongst the wheat. They are the tares, and the wheat don't even know that the tares are present, and that there is a bloodline that actually is from the devil here residing with us. And I'll read two more passages and then I'll get you to comment.
You got it.
But yeah, but just to reiterate, in the New Testament, in John, he brings up this story. He says, I know that you are Abraham's seed, speaking of the Pharisees, but you seek to kill me, because my word hath no place in you. I speak that which I have seen with my father, and you do that which you have seen with your father. They answered and said unto him, Abraham is our father. But Jesus saith unto them, if you were Abraham's children, you would do the works of Abraham. But now you seek to kill me, a man that hath told you the truth, which I have heard of God. This did not Abraham. You do the deeds of your father. And then say then to him, we be not born of fornication. We have one Father, even God. But Jesus saith unto them, if God were your Father, you would love me, for I proceeded forth and came from God. Neither came I of myself, but he sent me. Why do you not understand my speech? Even because you cannot hear my word. Ye are of your father the devil, and the lusts of your father ye will do. He was a murderer from the beginning, and abode not in the truth, because there is no truth in him. And one last thing, this is to tie it together, that the Pharisees literally were the murderers of the prophets, and that they are the children of Cain. And again, this is a very big secret that most people don't know about. Everybody still believes that Eve ate an apple, even though it makes no sense that an apple would lead to her being pregnant, and that there would be enmity between these two bloodlines that came about because of her eating this fruit. But yet, that's the way it is interpreted. And so, in Matthew, it says, and I'll shorten this a little bit. Wherefore ye be witnesses unto yourselves that ye are the children of them which killed the prophets. Fill ye up then the measure of your fathers, ye serpents. And here, he always alludes to them with this viper analogy. Ye serpents, ye generations of vipers, how can ye escape the damnations of hell? Wherefore, behold, I send to you prophets and wise men and scribes, and some of them ye shall kill and crucify, and some of them shall ye scourge in your synagogues, and persecute them from city to city, that upon you may come all the righteous blood shed upon the earth, from the blood of righteous Abel unto the blood of Zacharias, the son of Barachias, whom ye slew between the temple and the altar. Verily I say unto you, all these things shall come upon this generation. And so Christ again is tying them, the Pharisees, and their bloodline as being the murderers of the prophets to Cain, who was the one that killed Abel. And then Zacharias was the father of John the Baptist, and he was the rightful high priest. And we know that the priesthood was stolen from John the Baptist because his father was killed in the Holy of Holies, and then he became the voice that was calling out from the wilderness and that baptized Christ in the River Jordan. He was the forerunner, for the coming of the Messiah, and that prophetically was fulfilled through him. But again, here it says that, "But upon you may come all the blood of the righteous shed upon the earth, from the blood of righteous Abel, which Cain killed him." And so there's no denying that they are the children of Cain, which is spoken about as the tares, the wheat, and the tares, and that they are again the literal physical progeny of the devil, which is why we see all these secret societies and all these blood oaths and all of this, connections to the reptilians and to the Anunnaki, the seraphim angels, these dragon-like entities. It's all the same story once you understand and can make sense of the symbology. Last two things, and this also makes mention of how it is that Cain, when he was born, he had a serpentine um, look to him. In the Legends of the Jews, it says, "Wickedness came into the world with the first being born of a woman, Cain, the oldest son of Adam," which he was his stepson. "When God bestowed paradise upon the first pair of mankind, he warned them, particularly against carnal intercourse with each other. But after the fall of Eve, Satan, in the guise of the serpent, approached her, and the fruit of the union was Cain, the ancestor of all the impious generations that were rebellious towards God and rose up against him. Cain's descent from Satan, who is the angel Samael, was revealed in his seraphic appearance. At his birth, the exclamation was wrung from Eve, 'I have gotten a man through an angel of the Lord,' which we know that angel to be Samael. His name means the viper of God, the angel of death. And so we see that, again, it is the devil which impregnated Eve with Cain. One final comment here. It says, "We have already shown a tradition of the Jews that Samael lay with Eve and begot Cain. Upon this matter, we add the following passages. Under the title Adam, 'tis said, Eve conceived by Samael and brought forth Cain. And when she saw by his shape that he was unlike the lower creatures, and that he was of the upper creatures, she said, I have gotten a man from the Lord.' Again, it is said, he, Samael, lay with Eve, who conceived by his impurity, and brought forth Cain, whose shape was not like that of other men. Therefore he, namely Cain, became a murderer. As it is said, out of the serpent's root shall come forth a cockatrice." And so Cain is that cockatrice.
It's incredible, man.
Yeah, it really is.
You just laid it out very specifically, very detailed layout of this entire scenario, and I thank you for it. And I didn't want to interrupt you. I wanted to just let you go, and do it. That way people get a fair description of what's going on here, right? And that way they can go verify and see what's going on themselves. Now, I do have a couple of questions on this, right? So, there, from the way you've made it seem, the elite are the descendants of Cain, right? The people that are running things. You call it the New World Order, the Illuminati, whatever you want, right? They are the descendants of Cain, and they're running this world. The Bible does refer to this world as the world of Satan. I want to ask you about Satan too, and Samael and Lucifer. Are they the same person? that always comes up. But before we
Yes.
get there, um, is there anything to? And I don't know if you're familiar with any of the Rh negative stuff, but is there anything to the serpent seed and the Rh negative blood?
Yes. Yes, there is. And that seems to be the connection. And it shows the weird anomalous nature of how something occurred in this particular bloodline long ago that connects it to the descent of the fallen angels and their interdiction with the daughters of Cain, which I can share some stories about that as well. Um, when we have some time, I can
Absolutely.
give you some details on all that, and also share with you specific passages where the elites themselves talk about how they are different and how they have triple strand DNA, and so they are genetically different from the children of Adam as well. But and that Rh negative seems to give this bloodline psychic ability and a natural ability to interact with and conjure up demonic forces.
Wow.
Which, they even mention in the passage that I'll go into next, where they are strategically intermarrying amongst themselves, even to the point where they are genetically schizoid and schizophrenic because of their, their the genetics trying to keep it pure, that they're interbreeding with their cousins and close family bloodline, and that creates genetic problems.
Well,
But
that can be detailed throughout history, man. It seems
yes,
as if
exactly,
they're pretty proud of
they
their
are
lineage.
right,
That's
and
insane.
this is why they do that.
Uh-huh.
And it's for that psychic ability and for that magical capacity to invoke the demons and to interact and to um, communicate with them. And so, which it does not make sense at all to any of the rest of us, why you would put yourself at risk to having these genetic defects, but yet they do it over and over and over. And it is strategic in their bloodlines to copulate in this manner in order to pass down these capacities and capabilities to their bloodline descendants.
Most of the kings and queens and politicians, they're all related in some way, shape, or form, even down to our top entertainers, right? And there have been
Yes.
claims that all of them are Rh negative as well. Now, I happen to know a couple of people that claim to be Rh negative, and they're good people. So let me not crap all over you guys, but here's the theory, man. I'll give you guys a chance to retort whenever we do this again. Now, seduced. You're gonna get the word right when you're gonna get the, and I'm sure you've had gotten it several times in the past when we talk about the word seduced and the Garden of Eden. And did they just seduce them to eat a fruit? Why does it necessarily have to be sexual? I think you did a good job at laying out why, but go ahead and reiterate.
Well, yeah, again, we are shown by Paul that the mention of the beguilement in the garden, that it had to have had some kind of sexual connotation because it resulted in her losing her virginity. And so I'll share these passages with you because, this is again a very important and critical side of the story. And it's one that um, not a lot of people are willing to examine. And it's right there in your Bible again. And it's undeniable. There are multiple witnesses that can only be explained when you understand it in the manner that I'm revealing it. In 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verses 2 and 3, Paul says, "For I have espoused you to one husband, that I may present you as a chaste virgin to Christ. But I fear lest by any means, as the serpent beguiled Eve through his subtlety, so your minds should be corrupted from the simplicity that is in Christ." And so Paul is alluding here to, again, that Eve Because of her beguilement by the serpent, that is what caused her to lose her virginity, her chastity. We see this story reiterated in the Prevangelium James in a very interesting way. This particular story, I'll just read it. It says, "Now it was the 6th month with her, and behold, Joseph came from his building. And he entered into his house and found her great with child. And he smote his face and cast himself down upon the ground on sackcloth and wept bitterly, saying, With what countenance shall I look upon the Lord my God? And what prayer shall I make concerning this maiden? For I received her out of the temple of the Lord my God, a virgin, and have not kept her safe. Who is it he that hath ensnared me? Who hath done this evil?" And we're talking about the Virgin Mary here. "Who hath done this evil in mine house, and hath defiled the virgin? Is not the story of Adam repeated in me? For as at the hour of his giving thanks, the serpent came and found Eve alone, and deceived her, so hath it befallen me also." So, here Joseph, after taking Mary as a guardian, which, for people that don't know, Joseph was already an elderly, widowed man, and his children were older than the Virgin Mary when he took her he was her guardian, her caretaker. He never knew her sexually in any kind of manner. And being her guardian, he had her living at his house with these other virgins, and then went to do work, and 6 months later came home and found her pregnant with child. And he was freaking out, and he was like, "Oh my God, what am I going to do?" Here she's pregnant. But the interesting aspect is that he brings forth the story that the same thing happened to Eve. That is not the story of Adam repeated in me. For as at the hour of his giving thanks, the serpent came and found Eve alone and deceived her, so hath it befallen me also.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Yeah,
So
it
he's
just hit
saying,
me.
yeah.
Go ahead, continue. Go ahead.
Yeah, so he's saying that, the serpent impregnated Eve.
Yeah.
And that's what he's thinking, something happened here. And so he's reiterating, but of course we know that, the Holy Spirit overshadowed Mary, and that she was pregnant with the Lord and our King, and that was an immaculate conception.
Oh, that's an interesting passage, man. I'm gonna go back and take a look at that. But wow, interesting.
Yeah. And all of these that I'm reading are in my book, The Enmity Between the Seed Lines. But I've got 2 more confirming witnesses to the fact that, everybody knew in the early establishment of the church that Eve had been beguiled by the serpent. This was commonplace knowledge. It's only been lost to modern times and to, modern contemplation and consideration. But everybody in the ancient past knew about these things. And so in the Maccabees, which was a book that, was part of the original 80-book King James Version of the Bible, it's included in the Apocrypha. There's a story where the mother of 7 sons expressed also these principles to her children. "I was a pure virgin and did not go outside my father's house, but I guarded the rib from which woman was made. No seducer corrupted me on a desert plain, nor did the destroyer, the deceitful serpent, defile the purity of my virginity. In the time of my maturity, I remained with my husband, and when these sons had grown up, to their father died." And so she's alluding to the story that same as Joseph alludes to in the story of, has not the same occurred with Adam as is occurring with him. And so, that the serpent beguiled Eve and impregnated her with Cain. And just to give you one final, and this passage totally locks it up. I mean, it's absolutely undeniable. It's from the Gospel of Philip. It says this: He who has been created is beautiful, but you would not find his son's noble creations. If he were not created but begotten, you would find that his seed was noble. But now he was created and he begot. Let me explain this portion first, and then we'll go into the next part of it. This is speaking about Lucifer, who was an angelic being. He was created. He was not born of woman. And so that's what it's speaking about here. He who has been created is beautiful. We know that Lucifer was the most beautiful of all the angels, that he was so vain in his glory, and that all the other angels looked to him because of his exemplary beauty. And it speaks about this in Isaiah 14 and Ezekiel 28. But continuing, you would not find his sons noble creations. So it's speaking about him having children. And the reason his sons are not noble creations is because it says here in the third verse, if he were not created, meaning if he were not an angelic being, but begotten, meaning born of woman, then you would find that his seed was noble. But now he was created, meaning he was an angelic being, and he begot, had children. What nobility is this? And then here's the story that sums it all up. First, adultery came into being. That adultery was him seducing Eve. First, adultery came into being. Afterward, murder. And he was begotten in adultery, for he was the child of the serpent. And so he became a murderer, just like his father, and he killed his brother. Indeed, every act of sexual intercourse which has occurred between those unlike one another is adultery. So it's telling you here that Lucifer, being a created angelic being, he was never supposed to have children with human women. But he did, and his child was not noble. And the reason being is because his child was brought up in adultery, because he seduced Eve, who was married to Adam. And then after adultery came into being, then murder. And that was because Cain, being born of adultery, he became the first murderer. He killed his half-brother Abel, and that was the beginning of the enmity between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent. So continuing, it says, and he was begotten in adultery, which we know this is speaking about Cain, for he was the child of the serpent, and so he became a murderer just like his father, and he killed his brother. And we know his brother was Abel. So, I mean, it's absolutely undeniable. When you put it all together, you put all the pieces together, you read them in context, you study them in, as a puzzle all together, like somebody trying to solve a crime, an investigator trying to solve a crime. And you can't explain it any other way, in my opinion.
No,
It
points
just
in
does
that
not make
direction
sense.
for sure. No, absolutely.
Yeah.
Go ahead, continue, finish up. Go ahead.
Yeah, no. And so, again, all these verses, when you study them in the way that we are here, it becomes undeniable. And we have passages which also allude to the watchers, the angels, when they came down. They were given flesh bodies, which, everybody always asks, how was it that the angels were able to copulate with human women if they're not given in marriage and they're not, they don't really have physical sexual organs? Well, the story, when you read it in its fullness, they challenged Adam. I mean, they basically told on Adam and challenged Christ to put them into flesh. And they said that they would not fall like Adam fell. And so he said, okay, I'm going to put you in the flesh and then we'll see. But don't fall away, because if you do, then, there's going to be severe judgment against you. So I'll read this passage from the Keber Nagas, which explains this passage from Genesis 6 in greater detail than most other
versions.
other versions. It says this: "And they were content to leave the height of heaven, and they came down to earth to the folly of the dancing of the children of Cain, with all their work of the artisan, which they had made in the folly of their fornication, and to their singings, which they accompanied with the tambourine, and the flutes, and the pipes, and so much shouting, and loud cries of joy, and noisy songs. And their daughters were there, and they enjoyed the orgies without shame, for they scented themselves for the men who pleased them, and they lost the balance in their minds. And the men who did not restrain themselves for a moment," these are the watchers, "but they took the wife from among the women, those whom they had chosen, and committed sin with them. And straightway God was wroth with them, and he bound them in the terror of Sheol until the day of redemption. And they were fettered until the great day. The word of God conquered, who had fashioned Adam in his likeness, and those who had reviled and made a laughingstock of Adam were conquered. And the daughters of Cain, with whom the angels had companied, conceived, but they were unable to bring forth their children, and they died. And of the children who were in their wombs, some died and some came forth, having split open the bellies of their mothers. They came forth by their navels. And when they were grown up and reached man's estate, they became giants, whose height reached unto the clouds." Another passage which also verifies this premise is from the Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer. It says, "The generations of Cain went about stark naked, men and women, just like the beasts, and they defiled themselves with all kinds of immorality. A man with his mother or his daughter, or the wife of his brother, or the wife of his neighbor, in public and in the streets, which evil inclination which is in the thought of their hearts, as it is said, and the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth. The angels who fell from their holy place in heaven saw the daughters of the generations of Cain walking about naked, with their eyes painted like harlots, and they went astray after them, and took wives from amongst them, as it is said, and the sons of Elohim saw the daughters of men that they were fair, and they took wives of all which they chose." And so we can see that just like in the time of Adam and Eve, the temptation, the carnality, and of lust, that's what caused even the angels to fall and to lose their first estate and to give up their salvation and eternity. I mean, what an incredible thought, that they were judged severely because they basically tattletaled on Adam, and then they went and did the same thing, and for that they were, severely punished. But
well, I'm sure God already knew this, but it's incredibly difficult to be in the flesh, right? And I think that kind of solidifies it. Angels couldn't handle it either.
Yes, exactly.
It's a difficult situation. I got a couple more things before we get out of here. So,
sure.
So we have the whole issue with Adam, right? Because it also says that Adam also ate from the tree. Right. So this could be two different things: either ate from the tree and he had hallucinations and also had sex with Eve, or he had sex with the serpent. Which one of the two?
In my opinion, it was him repeating the act with Eve, because when you see, if you look in the rest of Genesis 4, where it actually speaks about them giving birth, it says in Genesis 4, And Adam knew Hava, his wife, who had desired the angel. And again, it was her desiring the angel which led to the conception of Cain. And she conceived and bare Cain, and she said, I have acquired a man, the angel of the Lord. And then here's the passage where I believe that Adam's eating is what led to this. And then she added to bear from her husband Adam his twin, even Abel. And so it's my opinion that his eating the fruit also with Eve resulted in the birth of Abel, meaning that he did not have homosexual relations with the serpent, but that he repeated the act he had seen the serpent and Eve perform with her, and that resulted in her giving birth to two different children from two different fathers. That his eating of the fruit led to the birth of Abel, and the serpent beguiling Eve is what led to the birth of Cain.
In your opinion, is there room for interpretation there? If somebody else presented a different theory telling you that he did have sex with the serpent, is there room for interpretation there?
Well, I think there certainly could be, because it's not clarified one way or the other. But I do know without a doubt that his eating the fruit resulted in the birth of Abel's, meaning so he did certainly have sexual relations with Eve. Whether he had, sexual relations, a threesome with the serpent, we don't know, because there's no consequences of that or any punishments laid upon him for having, performed such or acting in that manner. But we do know that Abel was born from his eating fruit with her.
All right. Satan, Lucifer, Samael. Some say all the same. Some say each and every one of them are different characters, different entities. What's your opinion?
In my opinion, they're all the same. Mm-hmm. And that Lucifer, the light bringer, that we know him to be the original, that he was the first and the foremost archangel, and that he was the one that iniquity was found, and that he led the other 1/3 of the angels of the Most High into rebellion that led to the war in heaven. Satan is the title that he was given after they were cast out. It simply means the adversary. But he's also known, Lucifer, instead of Lucifer, his proper name is Samael, the angel of death. And we see that in Genesis chapter 3, verse 6 in the Targum, that the serpent that beguiled Eve is called Samael, the angel of death. In the Gnostic text, in the Nag Hammadi codices, the demiurge has two other names. His name is Saklas and also Samael. And so we know that the demiurge is also Satan, and that the archons are legion, the forces under the demiurge. And Saklas means blind fool, which also another one of his names, Mastema, means the same thing. And that Samael is the viper of God, the angel of death, which we know that's what Satan is, because when he fell and was cast out, they were then placed under the authority of death. That the angels that rebelled against the Most High, they were the first to be placed under the authority of death, and they were the first to be cast down here to the earth. They were given a 7,000-year reprieve for what is the duration of the Second World Age. But when Adam and Eve were tempted and they fell, they were also placed under the authority of death as well. But Satan, Lucifer, Samael, the demiurge, they're all the same being.
Same entity. Okay, we got that. I do want you to hit the garments of power before we get out of here, because I have no idea what that is. So I jotted that
fascinating.
Down. But before we do that, right, there's a parallel to be drawn here between the Garden of Eden and a couple of other stories that are seasoned or sprinkled, I should say, throughout different cultures and a different different times, different mythologies. And I couldn't help but think about Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent. You mentioned the feathered serpent and how Quetzalcoatl supposedly came down and gave knowledge to the people, right? This is how,
Right.
and you hear this over and over again, right? The serpent coming down and giving knowledge. It
Right.
means knowledge in so many. The Naga people are the people of the snake. Um, Prometheus is he stole the fire from the gods and gave it to the
Yes.
humans. You know, so
Yes.
could this story in the Garden of Eden be just a way of simplifying and teaching us all these different parables or all these different myths in one story to teach us what happened to us, or is it a literal thing? I think you're a literalist, but go ahead anyway.
It is both, absolutely. And I do absolutely believe that this literally happened because even with the state of the world today, we see that we are, the great contest is on, that the New World Order elites tie themselves to the same bloodline, which I do want to share that passage that I'm telling you about, well, that the elites, declare themselves also of this bloodline, and
Go ahead.
it'll bring great revelation. It says this, and just to set up the story, this guy had hired, one of these elitists had hired a geneticist to look at his DNA and to see if he, being a child of Cain, if they were genetically different. And what happened is that both he and the geneticist were murdered, and then another DNA specialist received the investigation that he had began. He inherited the data set. And reviewing it, he came to this conclusion. It says this: his benefactor test subject believed that while most of the sons of Adam had double-strand DNA, he had been told by his family that he and his blood relatives were distinctly different and that he, like his fathers before him, had triple-strand DNA. He wanted my friend to secretly prove once and for all if this was true or not. The subject claimed that his extended family and their cousins, who are kings, queens, princesses, and princesses, as well as leaders of industry and banking worldwide, they believe they are children of an otherworldly race of humanoid beings. He'd been taught by his tutors that once upon a time, his ancestors had fallen to earth after some cosmic calamity in the time before the garden. He believed that while their ancestral mother was Eve, their ancestral father was not Adam. He was torn to know if a child of Cain was actually genetically different and whether he could be saved. He thought of the Vatican's pronouncement that the aliens are our cousins, and the Vishnu teaching of a time when gods flew in spaceships and destroyed whole cities in a single blast. He even had notes about Elijah being caught up in a chariot of fire. Maybe he had missed or misunderstood the entire history of his Bible. Maybe from Genesis to Revelation, it was about some far more tangible and real fallen angel, alien cousins than the ghost-like destroying angels he'd always pictured in his imagination. 1 second. They believe that they are humanoid cousins, superior hybrids, half human and only half alien. They once reigned from Olympus and were pharaohs. Whatever the real truth of their history, their belief is the driver of their actions. Being the true believers they are, they will continue to operate in accordance with their belief and the laws of alien Darwinian type survival. That's why they interbreed, to maintain the purity of the bloodline. That's why they secretly meet and connive to pass power between themselves. And that's why they must fool the rest of mankind into wars of self-destruction and debt, so that we may be forever enslaved to their lusts on this prison planet till death do us part. More than afraid, they know in their hearts that this is a fight for survival. The fight is survival. It had begun, just as my friend had said, as a murder investigation, starting with the first murderer, when that Luciferian demon dad had first whispered of the evil deed to his willing child, Cain. It continued down through time, the sons of Adam fighting for survival and destroying the alien giants in Canaan land, David and the hybrid Goliath and his four hybrid brothers, and at the all the hidden true believers since, hiding in plain sight. So powerful, so important, yet so afraid. These earthbound half cousins of ours continue to laugh, but it is a nervous laugh at that, as they have a joke or two at our expense, recreating their lying fathers' fall to earth and flashing their heretofore secret Masonic gang signs, hand signs to each other right in our face. I know now how dangerous their beliefs are, because they are being driven by their beliefs, taught to them by their real alleged father, the father of lies. And even now he knows the truth and whispers in his initiate's ears, just as he first did in Cain's ear. The sons of Adam, as long as they live, they are dangerous.
Wow. Insane stuff, Zen.
Yeah, no.
All right, give me a quick 2-minute version of the garments of power, just because I have no idea what it is. We can get into it at some other time, but go ahead.
Yeah, this is a fascinating topic as well. We could do a whole show on this. But basically, it was the clothes that were initially created for Adam and Eve. And these garments of power were passed down through the generations, from Adam to Enoch to Noah to Shem to Abraham. And from Abraham, they were stolen by Ham from Noah, and they were given to Canaan or Cush, and then Cush passed them on to Nimrod. And Nimrod wore these garments of power to unify the world in what was the first one world order. And then Esau, he coveted them, and he saw how Nimrod was a mighty hunter with these garments, and so he killed him. He slew him and stole them from him. And then Rebekah, Esau and Jacob's mother, she took them from Esau and gave them to Jacob. And then Jacob gave them to Joseph, and that was Joseph's coat of many colors.
Okay.
Yes. And it was this coat of many colors which was dipped in the blood, dipped in the blood. It says that of the kid, and they did this in order to show that Joseph had been killed by a wild animal. Well, when you understand that Christ comes in a robe of many colors that is dipped in blood at the end of days, it is that same garment of power that was created initially for Adam. And so it passes down from Adam all the way through his generations, and will be with Christ at the end of days when he returns again in Second Advent.
Excellent. Because could that have anything to do with the rainbow body in Tibetan Buddhism lore? I mean, we can find it in Christianity, but you can find it in any religion. I would bet. But are you familiar with what I'm talking about here?
No, but I would associate that in similarity to what is talked about of Adam and Eve's vestures of honor, and also their bright-natured being. So same thing. Yeah, it's a glorified body. Yeah.
I'm gonna get you some links on the rainbow body so you could take a look. It's fascinating stuff. And I'm sure you're gonna draw tons of parallels with your research and that. There's a lot of things between different religions, quote unquote religions, that are the same. It's insane.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Zen, I want to thank you for your time. I want to thank you for breaking this down as detailed and as concisely as you did. And thank you for coming to the Fringe. Let everybody know where they can find you, where they can purchase your books, all of that stuff. Come on.
Yeah, absolutely. You can find all of my work at sacredwordpublishing.com. We do have a publishing company, and not only are my books there, I've published 20 myself, but I've also released in different collections the different ancient manuscripts where I pull, as far as origin of sources for all of my books, that I put together and compile many of these ancient texts into different collections, like the books of Enoch, Yahushua Christ, the lost years, the early childhood and the infancy gospels, the Great Commission stories, all of the end time apocalypses and the Great Commission 3, the medieval Irish Apocrypha, Chronicles of Jeremiah, the Cave of Treasures, the Keber Nagas, so many different ancient texts. You just have to go there and check them out. But I am on Truth Frequency Radio on Thursday nights, Secrets Revealed, 9 to 11 p.m. Eastern, and also on Revolution Radio Wednesday night.